Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading Crossbow. My name is Lena, and as always, I'm here with my co-host Rob.
Hey, Lena, and I saw your halfway episode last week, so I'm excited to talk to everyone about what I thought about this book as well.
Yeah, it took an interesting turn. I was pretty excited after my halfway episode because if any of you watched that, you'll know like this book at the halfway point hits a lot of action. It's very intense. It's super exciting. I was,
Yeah.
pretty excited for what this book holds, but now, we're here to the full episode and well, I know you're going to pull it out of me because this episode is like the interview version where you interview since it's your pick and I answer. And I have some thoughts.
I'm sure you have some thoughts, but before we get into it, let's talk about just a high-level overview of what the book is about. This is a kind of historical fantasy. It's very much inspired by Renaissance Italy, specifically like Florence. You got the Machiavelli and the Medici banking clan, and that really serves as the foundation for this book's narrative. Now, this is not a fictionalization of real world events, but it is a very interesting novel. It did not go at all how I thought this was going to go.
Nope, not at all. And I had high hopes. High hopes.
So when we did the introduction, though, a lot of the reviews that we discussed were talking about The Sopranos and Game of Thrones as kind of the thematic, kind of reference material. I think those were not good reference points. But what about you? What did you think?
Well, that's funny because I thought they hit the nail on the head, like purely. Yeah,
Really?
I did, and I was wanting it to. I'm interested to hear what you have to say because I'm like, we've talked about Game of Thrones a lot. Like our books just tend to go that way lately, and so I'm like, this needs to be different than that. But it felt very Game of Thrones, and there's scenes that we probably need to talk about and try to be spoiler free on. But hello, Red Wedding. Crazy Game of Thrones, and there's like going to another kingdom. There's not like multiple kingdoms that they visit, in the setting, but it's spoken about, and so I definitely picked up on that. And then Godfather, very much Godfather, yeah. Sopranos. I mean, they're very similar. And I got that very much between the main male lead character Davico and his father, where his father kind of has the family business, and like Davico has to, he's supposed to inherit the family business, but heck, it's scary. So, I mean, yeah, I thought it was like those, but I mean, I'm curious now what you think.
So, I don't know. The reason why I'm saying it didn't feel a lot like that to me is if I had to pick a media property that this kind of felt like, and this might seem like a bit of a stretch, I would actually go with something like The Sandlot or My Girl, because this is very much a, coming of age story. You start out with a very young protagonist, and as the story goes, he has to grow into adulthood. And much like the pacing of those properties, it has a very slow lead up to this kind of coming of age moment. You have an introduction of a new person in their life, just like those movies, and then a long, slow montage of childhood before adulthood hits you like a ton of bricks.
Yeah, if your childhood wasn't The Sandlot, but like the inner city crime alleys of New York or something.
Well, and then even when the main character actually gets to adulthood, functionally he gets reset again, and he has to relearn how to come of age again and become an adult once again. And I found that to be actually a really interesting narrative that I really didn't see coming based on what we had kind of read about previously.
Yeah, absolutely. If you weren't going to say it, I was going to bring it up. It's a coming of age story. And, the interesting thing from this book that I definitely wasn't expecting. I mean, you don't get it from the cover. You don't get it from reading the back of it. I didn't get it from when you were explaining it, is it falls into a classic YA trope, actually, that I've seen plenty of times called but Daddy, I love him. And it's kind of a fun one. And because I didn't realize it was, but Daddy, I love him until, after the halfway point. I mean, it was going there, but like it hadn't solidly stepped there. And so when it did, I kept getting like the Little Mermaid. It is not, if you guys are watching this, it's not the Little Mermaid, but that moment where like he takes his trident and he blasts down the statue of Eric, and Daddy, I love him. Yeah, this book has it. Very not Disney though.
Yeah. So I guess let's talk about the characters. We have actually a pretty broad cast of characters throughout this book. We have a single protagonist, Deviko de Reguli, but we have a pretty broad cast of characters that go in and out of this story. Is there any particular character that maybe you felt the most attached to, or the ones frustrated you the most? Who stood out the most to you?
Oh man, I feel bad you have to start with this one because I'm going to have to like drop a bomb here on our viewers, but oh man, I'm going to say that to date, this book is going to have the worst leading character we've had on our podcast. I could not stand Deviko. Could not stand him. And I had high hopes for anybody that watched the halfway. Go back and watch that. But it's a coming of age story. I got it in the halfway, right? He's growing up. We start with him as, really young. He's a child, grows into, a teenagehood, and that was interesting because we have lots of testosterone and spying on women, and he's I'm a female, so like reading that perspective was actually interesting to me because most of my books have female lead characters. We can get back to more later, but like he's that was fun. I actually enjoyed that part of the read. And then I was kind of waiting for him to come into himself, right? That's kind of what this book's about. But as we progressed in the book, I found myself hating Deviko because I thought there was what I wanted him to be and grow and become, which is to become, leader of House de Reguli and step into his, this godfather kind of shoes and Sopranos and take on this like strong role and, not so much spoiler alert because I don't feel like I'm giving much away, but Deviko doesn't get there for me. It doesn't mean doesn't get there in the book because you guys might interpret it differently, but Deviko was a giant disappointment. I put him at the very, very, very bottom of all characters we've had on this show. And that includes what we just read in Gunmetal Gods. That's it. Okay, so even those characters I think were better than Deviko.
I don't really think that you're really supposed to like him. You're just supposed to, this was to help understand his journey towards this, metaphorical adulthood.
Yeah, I you're right. I agree. Because it's more interesting that it's told through his shortcomings.
Yes.
However, that we do have a significant moment in the book, and this is another character. This involves the dragon. Exciting. The dragon in the book, which is not a whole dragon. We just have a dragon eye, but it's an actual character because it's somewhat alive. And without being spoilery, Deviko has a bond with the dragon. We'll get to that more in Magic. I'm guessing you're going to go there. Yeah. But, so there's a moment with Deviko and the dragon where I really feel like this is Deviko's moment, and the book sets that up, and it sort of has two moments. And I really got this feeling that this was his coming of age moment. This is the pinnacle. This is where he changes. This is where he steps into this man. And it didn't get there for me. And it really was written like it was going to. And I was disappointed each time. But again, someone might read that, interpret it differently. But outside of Deviko, we had some very strong, super likable characters for me. And these are characters who were very flawed because you love your flawed characters.
Oh, I do.
We had three in particular for me.
Okay.
One was Celia. Celia is sort of a ward of the home that comes into the de Reguli home through some terrible means, and she lives with Deviko and his family as his sister. And she is strong-willed. She's had a lot of family struggle, and I talk about her in my halfway that I felt that she would have a strong part of the other half of the story, and she does.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I
so I really like her a
definitely
lot.
so I definitely agree. I think she is actually she's everything DeVico was supposed to be. Like she has
Right.
all the traits that the Navalese look for in their aristocracy. Their banking, clan leaders. She has all those traits, but she's not actually a member of the family. Instead, the heir apparent is, this fairly weak-willed, person. And so she really is set up to basically be that compare and contrast. What should DeVico be like, and where is he coming up short? And so her character is critical to this story.
And she's wonderful. But she's there's this art, and I forget the name of it. It doesn't really matter what it's called, but it's where they control their faces, they control how they react in certain situations, and it's where you're kind of putting on a face, so to speak, and she's an expert at it. So in a way, she's kind of a liar, and she has her own sort of separate life that she keeps away from DeVico, which is intriguing and interesting. She's setting herself up for success, and so that's kind of like a detriment to her, in a normal world, but in this world it's a good thing.
Yes.
So that's cool. And then there's the DeVico's. It's not his mother because his mother's passed, but it's basically his father's concubine. And there's slavery in this book. And we haven't talked much about trigger warnings. I think this book, mostly violence. We'll just say violence. I didn't see any sub things that were too crazy, but so it's her. She was a slave, but is basically lives like a mother in this home now because the father loves her, respects her, takes great care of her. She's cool. And then also another female character, which is, I forget her name, but she's this badass slaver. And it's terrible because that's like a bad thing in the book. Even in this book, they don't embrace it. They're like, oh, you do the bad thing, right? But she's like a badass, and
Yeah.
she keeps this like assassin next to her that sharpens her nails into talons with poison on them, like, it's just like, that's cool. So the sub characters in this were all amazing. I just hated DeVico.
Yeah. So if I were to pick three of my kind of ones I most was interested in, I agree Celia was amazing. And then the other two I liked were basically the almost mentor characters, Gazetta and Aga Khan. And one is basically the head warrior, and the other one is the chief assassin for the clan. They're always dispensing this wisdom, which is very appropriate for the genre of this book as I saw it. So,
Oh, those were great characters. I loved Casetta.
yeah.
He's basically this like hired blade, and the children, right? Like, not nursery rhymes, but like whatever the opposite of bad nursery rhymes of like, oh, don't be bad. Kind of like how we say the devil will come get you, but like
Yeah.
Casetta will come get you, And so characters were well developed. Whether I liked DeVico or not, there was not a part of his character that the author didn't explore or
Yeah.
didn't add to. So he's very much intended.
Okay. So for the characters as a whole in this book, how would you rate it on a 1 to 5?
4.
Yeah.
High rating for characters because when I think about books and whether or not I'd recommend them, and we're not going to talk about that yet, but I ask myself, am I still thinking about some of these characters after the book's done? And I don't think about DeVico one bit. I do not give a crap if he like is dying somewhere in some gutter in some kingdom in this novel. I don't care. I hate DeVico. But Celia, what the hell? And I can't, spoiler alert, I can't narc it, but like, what the hell? And also, the gal who does like the trading of people. What the heck? What happens? I'm still thinking of them, and that's amazing. So
Yeah.
very good character development.
Yeah, I think the characters as a whole, the cast of characters were pretty well developed. They all had some depth to them, especially the main cast. You see their characters change quite a bit over the course of the book. DeVico's character arc, I mean, it's not even like a climb. It's up and down throughout this book. where he's making strides towards progress and is coming of age, and then falls backwards, and then tries again, and then falls backwards, and but you get to experience that with him in a way that feels very like plausible. It's very realistic. And so I would also agree. I'm going to put this at a 4. I think this is a great character book.
Yeah, absolutely. Was not expecting that and pleasantly surprised.
Okay. So the setting itself, I mentioned earlier, this is very inspired by, Renaissance like Florence. What did you feel that this was a very unique or just a kind of rehashed setting?
Because I kept picturing Game of Thrones, we kind of went over that a bit earlier. I thought the setting was also great. When I was picturing all of these places in the setting, it was very, very clear to me what was going on. First of all, we have the main city where they're from, and very well detailed to the alleys and the kitchens and the house, Deregulate home. So cool. It all very much came alive to me, and I loved that. And then the other kingdoms as well. I could very easily picture. We never went. Again, I forget her name, the one lady who has like the slave trade, but I could picture that. It made it sound like very nomadic and kind of tent set up, and she has this kind of trading ring going on. And I don't know, I found it all very, very intriguing, super interesting. I was able to picture Italy, like the feel of Italy. And hey, I just got back from Italy, actually. I traveled there. So the author did a great job of describing these like streets, and there's like this sort of chase scene where they're trying to find someone and they're darting through them, and like it all came alive. I could picture like I was there. So I liked it a lot, actually. And there's a lot of depth there too that they didn't even fully get to, that has a bit to do with the dragon that was more implied.
Okay. So how would you rate the setting?
um Good, just good. So I believe we call good a 3 here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I very much did get the Renaissance Italy vibe, so which feels very not specifically unique, but the setting itself, as they brought scenes within the city or as they travel around, they were really brought to life using very descriptive language that really kind of brought you into that world. So it made it feel very real and very alive. And that took a setting that might have been just kind of average for me and pulled it up a notch. The one kind of criticism I would have with the setting itself is the use of the Italian words. I like that they're there. We've mentioned this in previous books, where certain words are brought in from the original inspiring language. So in this, like palazzo, instead using that instead of palace. I love that. That's great. Where I struggled a little bit with is where you'd get the word and then you'd get the translation of the word. So like, for example, Casetta is the stilettatore, but they'd also call him, also known as the assassin, and it was like, I'd prefer if it was just one or the other. Don't give me the translation, because that actually pulls the immersion away. I mean, I might appreciate it if I don't understand the word, but even a lot of the words, they're chosen very well, because if you just sound them out, it gives you a pretty good idea of what was intended, for that to mean. Even if I don't know if these are real Italian words or they're, some pseudo-Italian, that's specific for this setting. I don't know enough Italian to know. But what I didn't like is when stuff was translated. Like they'd give you the one word and then the translated word. I'd actually prefer if it just was one or the other.
So I know what you're talking about, because when I first saw stiletto, I actually thought I was talking about a high-heeled shoe for a second, and I was like, that doesn't make sense. This sounds like a weapon. So it took me a minute, and there's no glossary. And because there's no glossary, like, you actually just should keep reading. So if you keep kind of reading, and like the next page usually will kind of convey what it is. So it didn't take long at all where I was like, oh, that's like a skinny dagger. Yeah. Like, oh, I get it now. This makes sense. This is cool. So on the times when it did that, and it happened several times actually, I can't remember other than the one you just said, all of them where I was like, well, you didn't need to tell me that because I got it.
Yeah.
But on the opposite side, there was times when I don't know that I ever fully got what they were saying in Italian or Italian-esque, whatever it is, because sometimes it doesn't seem like real words. It didn't matter, and those are parts where my brain had to kind of gloss over and
Yeah.
be like, it's something, it's fine, it's probably this.
And a lot of those were like proper nouns, like place names or people's titles. And it's like, I just need to understand that this is a title or this is a place. That's the important part. And I got it. So, and those were actually the ones that were never explained. It was the ones that actually seemed very obvious that were the ones that were explained. It was like, oh, don't do that. But I don't want to, hammer down on this point. This was more of a nitpick for myself. It's just, I like that immersive language. But if you're going to do it, my preference would be don't bother explaining it unless it makes sense within the setting. So for me, I would also, I'm going to say this is a 4.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
So far our review is like pretty good.
Yeah. So
far.
So let's get into the magic. This is a fantasy book. There is magic in this book. Do you want to talk about it?
So there's kind of two parts to the magic. One is in lore. All right. So there's this lore of what they believe in of the gods. So in this novel, you're getting a storytelling of like this god's life. And we basically get sort of like the devil and sort of like a high archangel, almost not really, it's not really like that, but we get like a ugly god and a good god and a woman in between. The ugly god loves the woman, but she can never look upon him because he's so hideous and he stinks. And then there's like the beautiful Adonis type of pretty god, and she eventually goes for him. And so it's kind of this, the story of their world and the story of good and evil is kind of based around these gods. And so you get this kind of magic or the lore of magic from this kind of retelling. And this retelling of the gods happens in a couple different ways. It's talked about through the characters, and it's talked about through like snippets at not the beginning of chapters like we get sometimes, but like it'll be in a different writing, like italics kind of, and you're reading about the story. Just it happens throughout the book. And so we hear about magic in terms of like the land and in terms of like what some people like, for example, Daviko. I forget the name of it, but he has like a knack for understanding herbs and medicine and being in touch with the world. And so that's not magic, but it talks about like being in touch or in tune with what's around you. So I'm not going to call that magic, but if the story did have a second part, that might open up. I have no idea. But the magic that I got in this was just from the Dragon Eye, which the Dragon Eye, certain people can at times think it moves, or they see a little flicker in it, or maybe the nerve kind of moves a little bit, but no one's ever been really connected to it except Daviko. Daviko feels an attachment to the dragon, and I'm not sure how much we want to go into this. I'll let you guide me. But at one point, him and the dragon definitely become in touch, and we can talk about that without it being too spoilery. And the dragon and Daviko get a connection. So that's where we get the magic. And so Daviko harnesses the magic from the dragon in certain points of the story. And the dragon sort of lives in him. And that's very interesting. I wouldn't say it's very well developed magic. So I'm going to kind of stop there for a bit.
Yeah. So to talk about the first part that you were talking about. So this world has a very developed, kind of mythological lore, as you described, and a lot of it is essentially some variants of basically the fae or fairy people out in the wilderness, and they're constantly like interfering with people's lives in secret. At least that's what people believe, and then there's a whole pantheon of gods. There's with two chief ones, one being in the bright one and one being from underground, very much kind of like a Zeus and Hades type of scenario, with an Aphrodite in the middle that they both kind of think is pretty gorgeous.
You described that so much better than I did. Yes,
So
that's perfect.
but as you noted, this is more the world's mythology, and so we don't know what's actually true as far as that's concerned. Now, the magic of this book with the eye, so it absolutely is magic. It's just we don't get a lot of it. There's only a few scenes within the book itself, and there's just not much there to really say, oh, this is the magic system this uses. You know, it's it's very interesting, but I'd love if there was a sequel and we got to learn more about it. You know, I think that would be awesome, but there's just not much here to really judge the magic system.
I wish there was more because we get dragons connected to humans in many books. This has happened in several of the books that we read: Priory of the Orange Tree, Fourth Wing. I mean, this comes up a lot. So where I had a question is, if the dragon were alive, if it wasn't just his soul trapped in his eye, like I explained earlier, would, if the dragon was intact, would he be able to have a connection with Daviko like maybe a writer would, like an Aragon? Or I got the distinct impression that this is more of a feeding situation where maybe dragons just take over humans to do some dirty work sometimes. Because this almost seemed not like soul siphoning, but like just the dragon is malevolent, and wants Daviko to do bad things and craves it and needs it. So it's like, if we had more book, which one of these would it be? So I don't know. So it's intriguing. I love where the author went with it, but we definitely didn't get enough of it. And I said that in my halfway because we get a lot of pages. There's this eye on the desk. The kid wants to touch it like any kid would. We basically have a 4-year-old who's like, look at that, cool, touch, wants it, right? And then we do not get badass dragonery until like the exact halfway point. So just not enough magic. There's not enough of it.
Yeah. For me, I'm just going to give it a no rating. There's just not enough here for me to rate. What about you?
Okay, that's a good idea. Because I was like, do I make this a 1? I don't feel like it's a 1 if this was well developed.
I think what's there is great. It's just we simply don't have enough material to really rate it at this point.
This is a first for us too, because we can usually rate the magic. I would say this has full potential though.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. Now, actually, as an unexpected twist, this book did have some spicy elements, I guess, which I assume you were happy with.
Yes, I did not expect that. So yes, this is something that we talked about when we read the book that I recommended this month, and which is like, should we start rating like the spice level? But I just don't think we'll always have it, you know.
Yeah.
But like, in terms of spice level, I have to say, it's slow freaking burn the whole time. I was dying inside. I'm like, when Daviko's basically like this little virgin who's like stuck in his self the whole time and just cannot. He's going to explode. He's gonna explode everywhere. And like, so much so that his father even takes him to like a whorehouse and is like, dude, just get it out. And, like, people are constantly telling him, just like, go get a girl, man. Like, you're dereguli. Like, just seriously walk around the corner. Somebody will sleep with you. You need it. Because he's a horny little toad the whole book, and gets into, like, he's kind of creepy, you know? But then there's a scene, I don't want to say who it's with, but like, it was spicier than I expected. Like, we read Serpent and Dove, and I thought that was pretty good, but this was way better than that.
I would argue this is probably going all the way back to Fourth Wing before you, as far as like spice level.
Yeah. So also, most spice levels are written from a female's perspective. So like, first, we have a couple things going on here with the spicy scene. We have Daviko's, it's not, I guess, well, it's not his first time, because I already said his father was like, you need to get this out of you, and basically takes him to her house. That's a very, like, it's like a sentence in the book, so it's not really spoiling anything. So it's not his first time. But for all intents and purposes, it might as well be. Because the way that it works out for him is just different than the other time. Yeah. So, like, it's just very descriptive. I've never thought about it. I don't know. I'm saying too much now. But I've never really thought about it from, like, a dude's perspective, what things feel like. And the author very, very much described that male's perspective, how it felt like to be with that girl.
Yeah. So if you had to rate it, how would you rate it?
That spice was great. Spice wasn't great. It was like that's a 4 to a 5 spice right there.
Yeah.
But one time, once in the whole book.
Most of these books seem to have one time. In fact, that was
That's true.
a joke inside the last book,
True.
Serpent and Dove. They're like, oh, the spicy scene's normally about 2/3 of the way through, as the character was flipping through a romantic novel in the book.
Yeah. Is this our best spice scene? It might be.
Could be.
Yes, because
So,
I liked it way more than the Fourth Wing crappy lightning crap going off and furniture breaking, which I thought was stupid. So none of this love scene did I think was stupid. I thought it was very well written. This is, okay, worst character I've read in all the books we've had by far. Best sex scene. How did you manage to come up with that? I have no idea.
I don't know.
I feel robbed. I feel robbed of my genre. Well, we had no idea.
We had no idea.
Nothing tells you it's going to have this in here.
So it is in there. It's not crazy. It's a good scene. It's well written.
I think I just liked it more because it was a male perspective I don't typically get in these types of books. And I was like, that's neat to read.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the writing style real quickly. I already kind of mentioned my kind of pet peeve about the language, but how did you feel about the writing style of this book?
Yeah, so the book's written entirely from DeVigo's perspective, other than moments where it's not when the people are telling the story of the lore, but there's some snippets of the lore written from the god's perspective. So it's all from DeVigo's point of view, but we get an interesting thing that happens in this book that I don't know that I liked, which is where the perspective also becomes a narrator within the book, which was interesting because he steps outside of himself and says, now this part I almost feel embarrassed to tell you about. But it's an older, wiser version. So it's not like, especially in the beginning, when we have young DeVico going from, like, I think it was just child and then into adolescence. So, like, the author would say, when he starts to narrate his own life, like, and I should have done it this way, or whatever, or I should have been a better learner, or I know I should have paid attention. And then when he gets into his adolescent years, he's like, I'm almost embarrassed to tell you about this. And, oh, but, and it's like, I hated that. I don't need the book to step outside of I don't need the main character to step outside of himself, from future self, and talk about narrating what's like, okay, reader, here's what's going to happen next. It's a little embarrassing, but that was odd. Did you think that was odd, or is that just me?
I've read quite a few books with that idea, and whenever I get that, though, I always tend to distrust what I'm reading, that you now have an unreliable narrator, because that's the way this book is told, is that DeVico of the future is telling you, the reader, we don't know who you is, who he's talking to, but he's telling them about his past. He's trying to explain how he got to this point. And so I've encountered that plenty, and I'm fine with that narrative style. I actually feel like there was a missed opportunity because the first half of the book is a real slow burn, and it's genre appropriate. Like I said, watch a lot of coming of age stories. Not much happens for mechanically until about 2/3 the way through, and then suddenly shit hits the fan. That's the norm for this kind of story, and I'm cool with that. But if you're gonna have that narrator, he could have been hinting at that earlier on, and kind of help draw you in, be like, hey, this was the good times. If only I knew to really cherish these moments before things got bad, or something like that. I think that would have helped engage the reader to want to see what's going to happen, because that first half is real kind of slow burn.
Painful. Yeah, because from the moment the dragon becomes intriguing, I think it like pricks the boy's finger kind of, or he gets like a little bit of an ow. It's like 150 pages. I need to go back and count. But like before you get it again. And that's the part of the story from the original get-go that pulls you in, like, oh, badass, this ancient dragon eye. It's going to be pivotal. No, it's like 150 pages later, we get it again or something. And I'm like, why? So we have the weird narrator thing happening, which for me, I mean, I know what you're saying. I've had it happen in stories before, but this pulled me out. The way that it transitioned into it, maybe it would have been nice to have italics here, kind of like I talked about with the story about the gods. But like, it transitions sometimes in the same paragraph, I think. I'm trying to remember how it happened, but like here I am in DeVico's first person, and then I am to DeVico future self as narrator, and it did not flow right. I hated it, pulled me out of the story, and we're talking about a story that was pretty immersive. The characters are very well developed, the setting was super interesting. Especially in the beginning when we get the Dragonite, it's kind of like, oh, setting something up, but it takes too long. I hate getting pulled out of something, and it did that. So not high marks for me there. And I also didn't like the story went on and on at times. And a good example of this would be the DeVico retelling himself as like, oh, I should have focused on swordplay. I should have done this. He's literally out in a field for like pages and pages and pages identifying different types of mushroom and fungi. They're looking under logs, they're partying through grass, and I am not kidding. This goes on for pages and pages, and I did not need that type of setup to tell me that DeVico is more of a scholar. Like, it didn't do anything for the book. It didn't help establish the fact that that character that he was sort of learning from was somewhat of a patriarch for him as well. Like, I knew that already, and we had just copious amounts of pages and words set up to telling you, hey, DeVico's a bit lazy and doesn't like to play with swords. Like, I get it. So yeah, the writing to me, I was a bit bothered by it. I felt like we probably had 100 more pages in here than we needed.
For the genre of a coming of age where it just kind of goes on these tangents of that don't directly apply to the plot, but they're just trying to give you characterization or help understand the world. I feel that that's appropriate for the setting, and I was okay with that scene. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about the actual language. So this book gets a lot back into the metaphors and descriptive language, like a lot of the other books that I've really liked. It's not quite as far as some of the other ones, but I really liked that it wasn't just plain English in a normal world.
Yeah, I mean, it was fun to read. We haven't had that in a while. We haven't had that since like Swordcatcher and the book that wouldn't burn, like an author that's very descriptive. And I found that welcoming. It was nice to have that back. Yeah. It's clear this author is talented, good writer. I think he won a Hugo Award for one of his other books. So I just didn't see it in this book. So I feel with the writing style, I would read this author again. To see if he does some of the things I didn't like in this book. But I don't know that I'd read the story again. So I'm interested to see how this author writes, but I don't want any more of this story. So that makes it fall flat for like a 3 for me if I had to rate this, because there was times where it was just absolutely beautiful. The world building here was great. But I was bored, straight up bored, wanting to turn through pages sometimes, because like there was even a card game that wasn't needed. Like,
I think that was absolutely needed. It actually explains the world. It's a metaphor for the entire book.
It was boring.
All right. Well, I would disagree, and I'm gonna stick with my 4s on this one.
Wow.
I really liked the writing style of this book. You know, there's taste differences for me, but I'm actually really happy with the way this book and what I got. So I think it's time to show me the map. Here's the map. It is very much, obviously, an Italy-inspired map as far as from what I can tell. How do you feel about this map?
Yeah, so it's Italy. They flipped the boot around. Like, the boots normally should be kicking this way. It kicks this way. Like, it's like if someone said, hey, give me a map of Italy, but, like, change it up a bit. Kind of like copy my homework, but not so much that the teacher knows. It's kind of what I see here.
Yeah. So, in this book, they don't call it a boot. They call it the hook.
That's right. Yeah.
And then for the Mediterranean, it's Cerulean, essentially, and, off to the north, which is basically Chirac, that's basically France. They're kind of the big bad enemy as far as this, all these little small city states are concerned. When they get up into their neighbor, which we mentioned earlier, Marais, that's basically the Cisalpine, like Lombardy type area or Piedmont area of Italy, which, during this time period in Italy would have been multiple separate kingdoms. You would have Venice and Lombard and Piedmont up there. And so all of these places very much feel like, yep, it's Italy. And,
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm fine with that. I've kind of complained a little bit about during previous ones, but, I like this map. If it was a little more unique, I would definitely give it a higher score. But for me, it's a 3. What about you?
Yeah, so about the same. The map does what it's supposed to do. I referenced it one time, and earlier when I was trying to remember the name of the city that they visited, where I got the Game of Thrones feel, because they wore their hair different, their city was different, it felt different, I got different vibes, just like in Game of Thrones, and that was Marais. And so I was like, where is that? So it was fun. So I have no problems with the map. I get it. Italy, France, exactly what you said. It's what it's supposed to be. Now, here's where I get a bit tripped up.
Okay.
If we are in some of our really fun fantasy type of maps where it's not our world, it's not supposed to be like Italy, this is where we get a lot more fun things sometimes, where the compass rose is maybe a little bit different, or we get some fun things or cities, or if there's like, for some of the books I've read, if there's a night court, sometimes it's drawn with like little moons and stars and stuff. So we didn't get any fantasy elements to it, but it's not a fantasy book. So I hate to take away from it, but like one thing I really like on maps is if it gives us a compass rose. I do like the north, east, west. I like that on a map. I think it has to have it. So I wish that was there. And style wise, I think it could have had some more fun elements, especially because one thing that happens in the story is, it's like Italy and France. They make fun of each other. Like, oh yeah, in Chirou, the women wear their hair down. Oh no, it's not even braided. Can you imagine? Right, things like
Yeah.
that. It might have been fun to see like maybe some elements that made that pop out for me. Like this is definitely different here. But I don't know how to describe that so much. But like the map was just kind of basic. This looks like it could be a map from a history book. And even though we're not fantasy, doesn't have to have those fantastical elements. We are in a world that has implied magic or dragons. I think it could have had a bit more whimsical elements. So it's also just a 3.
Now, there was crossbow in the book. So we like to
Yeah,
talk about crossbows.
We do. I didn't write down the significance, but I did write down the page numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So, crossbow enthusiasts out there, for this type of book, I understand some people do the audiobook or there's the Kindle version, so I can't tell you what page numbers those are. But for our books, it was page 82, 117, 124, and 279.
Yeah.
So those are the page numbers. So we got 4 of them this time, and we have not had crossbows in forever.
Yes. Now, this is probably the most references to crossbows in a book so far. However, I don't think any of them were actually in the scene. They were just discussed.
Yeah.
Like they discussed the crossbow existing, but I don't think any actually showed up in the book. So I guess we've kind of reviewed all the different parts of the book. So let's talk about the book as a whole. So we'll bring up our S tier and talk about how we feel about this book.
All right, so this is where I've given some really high marks, right? So I've had some 4s in here. I mean, everything's been a 3 or a 4 for me. So that seems like I would give a pretty high rating, right?
Yeah.
Well, this is where our show goes a bit awry, because this is where we start talking about, would we read it again? Would we recommend it to a friend? Did we actually like the story? Which is where I have some issues. And so, based on my rating so far, you'd think I'd be giving this a 3 or a 4.
So, how do you feel about the story? Is this something that you would want to read the sequel to?
Well, no. I don't think I was too shy about that earlier. So, because I didn't like Daviko. I don't even like where he ends up. Like, where Daviko gets some influence from the dragon. We can say some of that. Daviko's on a mission. I just don't need to know where he goes. I would want to follow some other characters in this story. I mentioned that earlier. Celia. That would be what the heck was Celia? Celia in this, I can't spoiler it, but like I need more of her and we didn't get it at the end.
Okay.
So, but as far as the story goes, did I love the story? And I mean, really, the essence of this story comes down to we have a family that's new money, right? New money, old money. This is like a theme of the world. It comes up a lot. And so DeVico's family, in a way, is like new money. And there's old noble names, and they're not one of them, but they've built up this name. And with this name, they've basically become the power of the city, if not in title, but everyone knows it. And so everyone uses their family for leverage. And that's how their city thrives, is because of House DeReguli. And so DeReguli makes all the political moves. And so I found that, like, the political moves weren't that interesting to me. So, like, they have to make this political move with Marai, which is above basically Italy in this book. And the motivation for the political move, those motivations didn't seem to me to be kind of like you mentioned in what book was it? Mistborn, where you didn't sense the danger. So like I didn't sense the need. The need for it wasn't there. Now they mentioned they need an army. The city doesn't have enough money. We need Navola to help us with an army. And so those trades to me didn't feel powerful and important enough. So because of the negotiations and because of the trade with these neighboring countries, that's when we get these political moves that cause strife for DeVico. So I can say that without being spoilery. That's where his misfortune and where he starts in life and where he ends in life. This is how it happens. But my problem was the need for those things to happen felt off. And so the story felt weird. And then also for me, how Celia becomes part of the DeReguli home, what I thought their intention for Celia was versus what their actual intention for Celia was. Maybe I need like a short where I make like what I thought, that's a spoiler, where I thought was going to happen and what did happen. All this build up for what I thought it was going to be and what it wasn't. It wasn't one of those aha moments of like, oh, I get it now. I see what you're doing. It was oh, I'm disappointed because I think what I thought it was going to be is better. So the story fell flat.
Okay.
Very interesting moments, very interesting characters. But the reason for getting to the different places like Game of Thrones is, right? Like in like season 1 Game of Thrones when the North had to go to oh shoot, what's the name of the city where Cersei is? That one. Like I knew why they had to go there. This felt it just didn't I didn't get it. I didn't like it.
Okay. So, and I don't think I had the confusion that you did for
I'm
those
not
kind of things.
confused. Yeah, it's I shouldn't say confused. I'm not confused as to why. Like I get it. I get the trades. They mentioned the trades, but that didn't seem volatile enough.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of that is because like supposedly like um the other nation was essentially in a civil war, and yet they go and they just go and they have a fancy dinner and they and they travel around the countryside, and you don't feel the kind of imminent, oh, that this is a war zone. You don't kind of
Yeah,
get
or
that
this
feeling.
trade has to be made.
Yeah.
You know. And so when those things happen, like in Game of Thrones, when the gotcha, I don't know if gotcha's the right word, but when the gotcha surprise happens of like, oh, I was meditating this all along, ha ha ha, and like the naughty thing happens, I don't know. I want to feel the tension
Okay.
between those two warring agencies, countries, whatever, families, houses, noble. That feeling didn't happen
Okay.
for me.
So
That's all right. So it fell
yeah.
flat for the story. So I didn't like that. And I found Celia's story. I found other stories much more interesting than the main one. My mind kind of traveled more outside of the story. So the story for me was really rough. I would have a hard time recommending this out to friends. I'd have a hard time choosing to read the next one. So for a story for me, I would have to give this a 2.
Well, that's
Just the story though.
okay. So I don't know if I would have a easy time separating out the story versus the novel as a whole. Um, what I felt is that this executed its premise extremely well. I felt like I really, even though I didn't necessarily like DeVico, you know, you understood him, and you got to experience his change in life circumstances as the ups and downs of his growing up and learning to become an adult in this world. I I I I got it. I really enjoyed that ride. In fact, even all what you might consider the slower moments of this story, they were just setting up the cliff of the action that was about to happen. So what you might consider the more slower moments of this story, or where it stretches on a certain element a little too long, where you mentioned maybe it doesn't feel as critical to the story. I think that was all to kind of lull you into a like false sense of security before like the gotcha happens. And like I said, every this book is ups and downs, peaks and valleys, and the valley and the but the peaks are very few, and there's big valleys in between them. And I think the big valley is intentional in order to make those peaks that much more dramatic, because a lot of stories, especially if it's a more actiony type of story, those peaks and valleys, if they come too close together, you don't actually feel the shock of the peak. This is a frequent problem with modern horror movies, where they're constantly zapping you with the build up noise, and then it fakes you out. It fake jump scares and that kind of stuff. It keeps you constantly tense, and therefore, when the actual bad guy with the machete shows up, you could care less because you burned out all your adrenaline half an hour ago. Whereas this book, because it's these long valleys, then all of a sudden a sharp peak in the action, it gives you a very strong sense of holy crap, what just happened. And I feel like that was very intentional, and I feel like it was executed very, very well. So for me, it's a 5 on the story.
Oof. Ugh, I don't know. And I just there's one. You know how like especially in films, directors will drop like hints, right? Like maybe a book gets laid down earlier and there's a title that shows and it plays into it later. Well, in this, without being spoilery, there's like even a character that comes up where I think, oh, this person will be back in my mind, and then they were. And then, like, in the later half of the book, DeVico's at one of the worst moments in his life. And this repeats. Like, it goes on, and it goes on, and on, and on. And, like, the gotcha moment that I think that the author was setting up, for me, felt like, and it was there all along. Agatha all along, in a way. Like, it wasn't surprising to me. It wasn't gotcha enough. The parts that were gotcha you, where I was surprised, came in the first half of the book. Red weddingish. Drama. Blah. And that was not predictable for me. I was like, holy shit, that happened. But then in the latter half of the book, none of it to me felt that crazy.
And see, I think I fell for them a lot more effectively than you did. So as far as for like whether or not I would recommend this to other people, I don't think this kind of story is right for everyone. I feel like, you know, like there's certain people, like if you go to the old classics, there's people who like tragedies and there's people who like the comedies. And
Yeah, fair.
and if you're more of a tragedy person, this is more the book for you.
I mean, it's an interesting book.
Yeah.
And it is a tragedy. And when you put it like that, sure. Was this a great tragedy? Yeah, it's pretty good.
Okay, so
A lot of unexplained elements, but I can't refer this for people. I can't give this the good old Lena thumbs up here. If I had to put this on my S tier, this isn't as low as Gunmetal Gods because of Celia, because of the gal whose name I keep forgetting that was like the slave trader. She's interesting because of what could come from those characters. I'm interested in that. And I kept thinking about them. Whereas I put Gunmetal Gods down and I have not cared. But I still want to know about her. And that is what raises this to a 2.
Oof.
So, yeah, it's a 2. I struggled. Those long parts, especially in the latter half of the book when Deviko is at his lowest. When you're rooting for him the most. When you really, really want him to come from the bowels of his situation, which I'm trying to be as, discreet as possible, and rise above. Sorry, Deviko, you fail. I hate that for him.
So for me, I would actually rate this as being my favorite book of the year.
Oh my God! No! No!
So, now, because I'm putting Some Desperate Glory from last year, because we read that in December.
Oh God.
So, because
you shocked me more than the writer did. I did not think you were going to say that. There's no way. Are you saying this is a 5?
I think I have to say it's a 5. Now,
oh shit.
Now, but as I said, I think this book did its concept extremely well. There's whole points of this story where I was listening to like the advice of his teachers like Aga Khan and Kazeta. I was listening to their advice and then watching him just like screw it up. and then each time he's given a new opportunity, he's failing at this growing up. And I think that's done so well, but it's done believably for me.
Ugh.
So I'm very excited that I hope there will be a sequel, because this is very much set up like it needs a sequel. Because if this is it, I would actually, and there's no more books, I would actually probably bring this down to a 4 because of the way it ends.
I don't think there's supposed to be more books. This is it. Okay, so at the end of the year, when we go through and we change our ratings around, because we've talked about that, if this does not get a C, if this is it, you have to lower it.
We shall see.
All right, so I will give you this. If the next book, if there is one, I don't think there is, but if there is, and if it's from Celia's perspective, I'll read it.
Okay. And if there's a next book, I will definitely read it, regardless of the perspective.
Wow. If we didn't have that last third of the book where Deviko's at his lowest and we have to live that with him forever and ever, this book would be rated much higher. But that was pointless. Pointless.
No, I think that was the core of the story. I think that. Yeah. So we definitely are not agreeing again on this one. However, despite the fact that all of our part reviews were pretty much in sync. So
yeah. My halfway review for this was pretty darn good. So I give it that. So there's something here. I'm not saying there's not. But our next episode is going to be us giving you the next books. So make sure to tune in next week so you can read along with us on our next picks. And I chose something very different next month. So excited to have you guys along for that ride.
Yep. And I'm choosing something it's not quite a throwback, but it'll feel like it.
So if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. We had a tremendous amount of growth this month and we really appreciate it. So hit that button below and join us next week.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And until next time.